Are we good? Okay, we are live. We are live streaming, people. Welcome to the first ever API Security Meetup. I am Leslie Peterson. I'm one of the co-organizers, and we want to thank Engage, my company, for sponsoring tonight. So thank you, us Engagers. Talk about a couple things that are happening in the community before we do introductions and get going. There is a Momentum conference. So, Michael, could you come up and just give a plug for it? It's coming up October 19th.
I am Michael Richardson. I am the lead organizer for Momentum Developer Conference, happening on October 19th. This will be our 5th year. We've got an incredible lineup of speakers. I hope you'll check out the website, momentumdevcon.com. And I will, for anybody in the audience tonight or listening in or whatever, we have a discount code that I'll be setting up and can send to you, API Sec, and you can get $10 off a regular price ticket. Those do close on the 14th or 15th, so go ahead and get that locked away right now. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Michael. Another plug we want to give is for the Southwest Ohio Give Camp. This is a week-long volunteer event. We have a ton of people from our company that go support this. It is to bring volunteers together to help build, web and software solutions for local nonprofits. So they do some really exciting work in that weekend. It's a ton of fun. It is October 13th and 15th. And there are cards over there. Please feel free to grab one and sign up to volunteer. Or if you know a nonprofit who wants to benefit as well. Because we are sponsors at Engage, I want to give you just a quick overview of who we are as a company. We are a purpose-driven technology and management consulting company, and that purpose-driven is huge. It's a part of our DNA. We are a certified B Corp, which means we use business as a force for good, and we are 100% employee-owned. So we have a lot of committed, passionate people that work for our company here in Cincinnati. We do everything from designing, building, and delivering custom IT solutions. So we can put full end-to-end project teams together. We can help augment staff if you have a need on an existing project. We also have some strategic advisory services, so if you need process improvement, all those roles within the software development lifecycle we have. We're always looking for good people and good projects, so feel free to ask me if you have any of those needs or wants. I'm excited to bring John Heckler up here. This whole meetup is his brainchild. He was very excited about the idea of bringing the community together to talk about all different aspects of API security. And he was right. We had a great turnout, so I'm excited to see how many people are joining us on live this stream and then in person. This will be a monthly event. Bear with us if we have a little bugs this time around. It's our first one, but I'm pretty excited to bring John up here to talk more.
Thank you. Well, thanks for coming. This idea would not have happened. None of you would be here without the amazing work and help of Engage to get us started here. A lot of the folks have helped volunteer, and so I'm going to make sure I thank all of them. But it's an exciting time. I'm happy that we got this thing going. If there's one thing that all of our companies in this local area can collaborate on and share with each other is our ability to fight off the bad guys, right? So if there's anything for us to get together and share our secret sauce with, this is a good area. So hoping we can build on that. Please let us know how this comes across. If there are other areas, subjects that you want us to make sure that we cover in future meetups, please give us that feedback. We will send out a survey at the end to kind of collect some of that from you guys. So again, please let us know. I'm going to get my phone out so I don't forget anybody. Okay, so super excited. A lot of work went into this. Interest seems to be very clear, so that was one thing we weren't 100% sure on, but it's looking good. We have an awesome first speaker for our very first meetup on API security, Dan Barahona, sorry. Yeah, and I would like to also thank both Michael Richardson and Tony Bomarito. They were at API Days several months ago in New York and ran into Dan. And and so, long story short, he's here giving our first API Security Meetup on why we all need to care about this. So we all know it's not just software, but APIs are eating the world, and it's becoming increasingly important for all of us to pay attention to this. And I just lost my notes. Awesome. Cancel. All right, so first and foremost, Leslie, thank you so much for all your effort. Huge effort. This also would not have happened today without Leslie, I'm just saying. I can be the idea man, but it would not have happened if it wasn't her working very hard to keep me on track and keep this thing going. And Phil, where's Phil? Phil has been right in front of me. Phil's been huge. We wouldn't have any of this set up if it wasn't for Phil, so thank you, Phil. And then, again, the facilities and the food and the logistics all provided by Engage, so thank you very much, Engage. So I'm not going to drag this out too much further, but I also want to thank Robert Buchanan. So Robert over here, we've worked with Robert. I've worked with Robert for many years. We have a history. We go way back. Super great to see him again tonight. And he will also help us with ongoing meetups with additional subjects, topics, content, things like that. So if anyone else has a burning passion for this space, we welcome additional help too. So please don't be shy. So next meetup, Leslie. October 10th. All right, and then we'll have Robert there for that one. And then in November, we also have one planned for there, and we've got No Name as a speaker, so they will be interesting if you haven't heard of their company. They're doing some very interesting things in this space. Okay, so without further ado, Dan Barahona.
All right, thanks so much, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to be the inaugural speaker. I feel extremely honored to have this role, and I'll just say I'm going to cover a lot of territory here in this talk. I'm not deeply technical, but I know this space pretty well. If anything sounds super interesting, then go talk to Robert and let him know that should be the topic for next the next, and maybe the next 2 or 3. So, all right, why should I care about API security? That's the topic here. My name's Dan Barahona. I'll give you a little bit of my background. There you go. Oh, we lost it. Why is it not there? Uh-oh. Do you have a technical glitch? Why am I not seeing my slides? Hold on. Did we lose the... Why are we not getting the slides anymore? We got to go over to here. Yeah, we're not getting it.
Oh, I know. Here, let's bring your Chrome back up for me.
Yeah.
We didn't do the whole screen. This little guy right there.
There we go. Is that working? Yeah, there we go. Yay. All right. Now you know what the topic is. And a little bit about me. Obviously, there's something really special about to appear on the left side here. So I'm Dan Barahona. I've been in cyber for 20 plus years. Companies like Anomaly, Qualys, ArcSight. You might have heard of some of these. I'm currently employed by API Sec, which is obviously very close to the name of API Sec University. We're in the API security testing business. That's what we do. If you ever want to learn more about that, come talk to me. I went to a school nearby, but I wouldn't dare put the logo on it. I could count on Tony to out me on that. But I'm also the founder of API Sec University. And this is something we launched just a year ago. And we just saw this need to train and educate the world, the market, on API security risks. And we kind of did this on a whim, and it just took off, right? We're over 55,000 students at this point. I just ran the numbers again. 75% of the Fortune 100 are using our courses. All these courses are completely free. They're non-vendor. We don't push any technologies or anything like that. So highly recommend you check it out if this is an area of interest. I'll bring up at the end of the conversation some of the specific courses that we got. All right, so why are we talking about API security? And there's really three main reasons to this. I'm sure this won't be too much of a surprise. APIs are everywhere. They're eating the world. 83% of the internet traffic is API-based traffic. That's a stat from 3-4 years ago. It's probably over 90% at this point. And we all know the wonderful things that APIs do. APIs are under attack, right? For years, Gartner's been predicting that by last year, 2022, APIs would be the most frequent attack vector. I don't know if that's true, but they stand by it. But when you look at the headlines, and we'll spend a lot of time looking at real headlines, that sure seems to be true of the most successful breaches, right? There are tons and tons and tons of examples. I had to update my deck from one for last week, right? That we'll talk about here in a minute. So they are absolutely under attack and very successfully, right? And we'll talk about why that is. APIs are undersecured, right? So this is a study from Rapid API, and they basically looked at all the testing that we do on APIs and how much of that is geared towards security, right? They surveyed, I don't know, 2,000 companies or something like that. So the number might be plus or minus, but you get the idea, right? Like, tiny little sliver of what we're doing to test APIs is for security purposes. We unit test, performance test, right? All of these things, but security, not so much. And the reality is the nature of the attacks that APIs are seeing are just fundamentally different, right? We've got WAFs and static code analyzer and all these things, right? And these tools are fine, right, for looking for, you know, cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, injection vulnerabilities, all that kind of stuff at your UI level, right? But what do the attackers do? They just go right around it, right? And what they're finding is that these APIs often are undersecured, over-permissioned, have all kinds of access that you can't get through the UI, right? And so it's an incredibly rich target for attacks, right? So here's pro tip number one. Your UI is not part of your security stack, okay? You think about it, right? What does the UI do? It presents. What else does it do? Controls what you can see, controls what buttons you can press, right? And make sure I see my data, not your data, right? But if the UI is using a bunch of APIs and we're relying on the UI to do that control, the API is uncontrolled, right? Or has much less control. And we're gonna go through a bunch of examples and you're gonna see this in spades, right? Tons and tons and tons of examples of APIs that have far more access, far more permissions than the UI does, okay? So it's different, right? You have to be securing at the API layer, not just at the UI layer where we largely have been. So it wouldn't be an API security talk without hitting the OWASP API Security Top 10. Probably everyone in the room is familiar with OWASP, best known for the OWASP Web Security Top 10. They came out with a separate API Security Top 10 back in 2019. About 3 months ago, they came up with a new edition, the 2023 edition of the Top 10. And that's what you see here. A few changes, few additions. What didn't change is the top two: broken object level authorization and broken authentication. Those are the same, number one and number two from 2019. They carried forward. A bunch of other changes, right? They got more complicated, the words, right? The first one, they call it BOLA. Number three is now BOPLA, broken object property level authorization. Unrestricted resource. You know, we have a whole course that's just dedicated to OWASP. You should know about it. And in fact, there's my little plug. So on API University, we've got, you know, again, totally free, a whole talk dedicated to this. But this is really, if you're gonna get started in API security, this is the place to start, right? The OWASP Top 10. It is really, you know, the de facto standard, right? It's not everything. They're gonna squeeze it all in the top 10, but that's where you want to start. Okay, so let's tell some stories, right? Some of these, first of all, I'm just curious, like how many, raise your hand if you have heard of API University before. All right, maybe 15%. So then these will be new stories for you. If you'd been in AppSec, you might be like, oh, I've heard Dan talk about that before. All right, so we're gonna go through, I don't know, 8 or 9 real-world breach examples. And it's not to embarrass these companies, it's to shine a light on how difficult it is to anticipate all the ways that your API can get abused. And then maybe spark some thought on what are the ways we should be thinking about our own APIs, right? You know, all that negative testing. What are the ways that it's not intended to be used, but could be, right? So this one's just from last week, right? I don't know if any of you are taking Duolingo. I am. And this is kind of remarkable. So they had an API, unsecured, open endpoint. Anyone can access it, right? And I'll actually show you here in a second with my own data, because I'm really that committed to my craft. That you could basically query any email address through this API, and it would respond back to you if they're a Duolingo user. And it would give you a boatload of info about them, right? Now, Duolingo's like, oh, that's by design, right? There's nothing sensitive in here. Maybe, maybe not, but it sure is useful info. If you're going to create like if you want to dox people, right? You want data about them from every possible walk of life. You want to fish, do all these things. And so 2.6 million emails or accounts were harvested from Duolingo. Okay, now how did they do that? They took owned, like have I been owned, email lists, like known, like breached, harvested emails, and they just threw them at Duolingo. So to get the 2.6 million, they probably tried 260 million addresses, right? Like how on earth did that API just allow that to keep happening, right? Like wouldn't you notice after 1 million or 2 million and just stop, right? But no, and in fact, you know, I'm not that technical, but even I could do this, right? So this is literally me hacking me. That's my email address, and there you go. My streak is 590. Check that out. It's pretty good. Yeah, thank you. I still can't speak Italian, but you know. But you can see all kinds of stuff in there about me, right? So, all right, so I'm going to highlight what aspect of OWASP was violated in these things. This is OWASP number 4, unrestricted resource consumption. Like, think of how many millions of times this thing got queried for an illegitimate purpose. All right, next. This is my favorite. Coinbase actually gets a whole lot of credit in my book for this, for how they responded, how they dealt with this, right? But this is a fascinating story. So this researcher really wanted to kind of examine the Coinbase APIs. So set up an account, started trading on it, and started watching the traffic. And every time he did a transaction, there were these 4 parameters in it. Like, what is he selling? Ethereum. What side of it? And sell or buy. Source account, target account. That's what he was doing. And he's like, all right, every time I run a transaction, that's what it looks like. So let me get rid of the UI. I'm just going to query it directly through the API. He's got authentication, he's got credentials, and it let him do it. So like a good hacker, he's like, I'm going to throw some ridiculous things in here because I want to see the error messages, because that's also something that can reveal information about your stack. Except it didn't give him an error message, it worked. Okay? And so what did he do? He owned Ethereum, right? 0.0243 units of Ethereum. And he did an API call to say, that's not Ethereum, that's Bitcoin, right? It's like having pesos and selling them as dollars, okay? And so he suspected an error. Instead, it said, like, filled. You can see down there. He did a sale of Bitcoin of 0.0243 units he didn't own, and $43,000 deposited into his account, right? That is a logic flaw, okay? That's a logic flaw. It's not an injection or a cross-site scripting or anything like that, right? And you can look this up. So what, at that point, he probably thought he was going to jail or something, right? He just stole $43,000, contacted the CEO, contacted everyone, and Coinbase reacted, right? They shut down the marketplace, they reproduced it, and they fixed the issue, and they blogged about it. And you can find the blog, and it says, the root cause was missing logic validation check. That's the exact words, missing logic validation. There was no code in the back end that said, are you selling what you actually own? And keep in mind, he could never have done this through the UI, right? There's no button in the UI that says, change this Ethereum to Bitcoin, right? Like, what do you want to sell it as? You want to sell it as Bitcoin? You want to sell it as something else? Yeah, exactly. So that's what we call BOLA, broken object level authorization, right? He's manipulating the object properties. He was able to overwrite what it was to something else. All right, let's keep going. Sorry? They did. He got $250,000, largest bug bounty payout ever, and deservedly so. All right, we'll go a little more rapid fire on these. All right, U.S. Postal Service. Okay, so they had an API or a service called Informed Visibility. If you want to get like scans of your email or of your mail and all these kinds of things, you can also access it through API, right? So you go in, any one of us can go get one of these accounts, no big deal. Problem was, if you access it through the API, not only could I look up my records, I could look up Michael's records, I could look up Michael Jordan's records, my next door neighbor's records, anybody's records, right? So they had authentication, but they did not have authorization, right? This is one of the most common things that we see with APIs, right? They're like, we're safe, we got authentication. Nope, that doesn't make you safe. That just means, Dan is Dan, but I can still do whatever I want, and in this case, 60 million users harvested through that. So that is broken object level authorization, meaning I'm accessing somebody else's records, right? Peloton, I'm in like almost all of these breaches, by the way. Not that I ride my Peloton, but I have an account. This one's kind of, similar, right? So they had an API that really wasn't meant to be used by anybody, but one of the pro tips is if you've got an API powering your UI, hackers are going to find them. They're going to, right? You have to assume that. They're discoverable, not even that hard, right? So they had an API, someone found it, and you could use this API to query anybody on Peloton's database, all 4 million users, including if you marked your account private, right? There's a setting like I want to be private, I don't want to be discoverable, doesn't matter. API still had access to it, including Joe Biden's records and all these other people's records, right? But that wasn't enough, right? So this researcher notified Peloton. It took forever for them to actually respond. They did, and they added authentication. Okay, so great. Now I have to authenticate to this API, and I could still see all 4 million users' records, right? Like, you're not done with authentication. Maybe that's pro tip number 3. So they violated 2 of them, right? The authorization and the authentication. Okay, Venmo. This is kind of interesting. So they had have you ever used Venmo, and on the homepage it's like, look at all these recent transactions, right? It's all anonymized, right? It doesn't have my name or my last name or what I'm buying and all this kind of stuff. Turns out that feature that fills up the homepage with the last 20 transactions is powered by APIs, as you would expect. So this person decided to call the API directly. Guess what? It returned all the records. I mean, all the fields, right? So not just first name, last name, dollar amount, what the goods being sold, Someone even built a website to track drug deals on Venmo using these APIs, right? Like literally. So he harvested 200 million or something like that transactions in this way. What's the issue here? Unrestricted resource consumption, but also don't return more data than the application requires, right? In this case, if you wanted to show anonymized data in the UI, then only return anonymized data, right? Don't require the UI to do that filtering, right? Just send what the application requires, right? As you see here, there's truly no reason to have this API open. There was no reason. Okay. Instagram, this is an interesting one. So say you forgot your Instagram password, right? You hit reset. They send you a 6-digit code. That's 1 million combinations. And you go check your email, and you find the code, and you type it in, okay? So if I wanted to take over someone's account, I could do exactly that. Say, I have your Instagram. I forgot my password. Can you please send me the code? Turns out you can submit the code through APIs. And they were smart. They were like, all right, well, we're going to limit you to 200 guesses per IP address. All right, so you know where this is going. Someone just set up a farm on Amazon or wherever, and they just rotated IP address every 200. Boom, 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 right? And within the 10-minute timeout, could get through every combination of those 6-digit password or codes, take over anybody's account, right? What do we got next? Oh, Bumble. So this one hits a lot of different ones. So basically, this is the dating website. They had an API, had full access to the entire database, so all 95 million users. Okay, all right, that's a OAuth number 2, broken authentication, right? The fact that I could see everybody else's, that's OAuth number 1, broken authorization. I shouldn't be able to see other people's records, okay? But it gets worse than that, because not only could I see and access all these people's records, they also had OAuth number 5, broken function level authorization, which means I could actually perform activities or actions on any account, including things like change someone's account from free to paid, right? Or, you know, I could delete somebody. I could perform actions. So the point here is it's function level failure, right? Like, you shouldn't be giving access to functions that the user doesn't require. And to icing on the cake here is this person not only did all that, but one of the fields that returns is your distance from that other user. So they created 3 different accounts in 3 different parts of the country, and they could triangulate everyone's exact position on this dating app, all 95 million users, okay? So there you go. Experian. So this one is really, we call this OAuth number 9, improper inventory management. That's really about like things like retirement, right? If you go from API v1 to API v2, right? Well, what happens to v1? You leave it there forever, you know? What about when you go to v3? Do you still have v1? For sure, attackers are looking at your old versions, right? That could be undeprecated endpoints, you know, documentation that reveals too much, all kinds of things, right? But also part of inventory management is third-party use of your APIs. So in this case, Experian created an API for their lenders to use to be able to look up the credit score of anyone that was looking to apply for a loan, right? So it's a pretty handy thing, right? If you're a lender or credit union, you want to look up someone's credit score, here's an API for that. This person discovered the existence of this API because one of those lenders took the API and put it on the internet and built a website that was like, check your credit score here, right? And that website was using this Experian API, and it turns out that you could put anybody's information, as long as you had a name and an address and a date of birth, right? You could look up anybody's records, which is pretty easy to find. But actually, the date of birth field, you could put any number you wanted in it. As long as you put numbers in it, you could put 99999, right? It would return, right? So really all you needed was date of birth, name and address, and you could look up anybody's. And that was all because they provided this API to a third party who then exposed it to the world, right? So that's why that's OAuth number 9. This one is a little different. This is actually like, I don't know what you would call it, activism. So this happened, this is Yandex. This is a Russian company. And the group Anonymous actually used an API there to request hundreds and hundreds of taxis, all to go to the same location, which was the Ukraine hotel in Moscow. That's what it's called. And basically caused a gigantic traffic jam, right? All by abusing this API. But, you know, like, I'm not going to comment on the rightness or wrongness of that, but it just, you know, just makes you think, like, all the things that your API could be used to accomplish, right? In all kinds of ways that it wasn't meant to be used. And is that my last one? Yeah. So those are all the examples, right? Which ones actually stood out there? So for me, all of them are relevant. Like, I'm not going to pick favorites. Well, my favorites are number 1 and 2, but they're all relevant. Like, I'm not saying disregard all the rest of these, but for sure, right? Authentication, authorization comes up all the time, right? A lot of people leave their APIs unsecured, wide open to the world. Okay, first thing, don't do that, right? Second thing, make sure that once they're authenticated, you're going to the next step, which is controlling what can be done as an authenticated user. Unrestricted resource consumption, like, you shouldn't be allowing millions of requests to go undiscovered. And there are some that are just missing from the top 10, right? This isn't like everything, right? Some of the things that got dropped from the 2019 version, injections, that's not on the list anymore, still very relevant. Logging and monitoring, and really the one that's you know, near and dear to my heart is business logic. Like, what's unique about your business? How could your APIs be manipulated? So that's what stood out there. The 3 pillars here. So we think about, like, what does what does API security really encompass, right? We start thinking about like, what are we, how do you go about addressing API security? And having spent a couple of years in this space, these three pillars really seem to resonate, right? So there's governance, which is how do you go about developing, deploying, productizing your APIs? And that encompasses a whole lot of stuff, right? It's documentation, it's standard setting, it's how are we managing and deploying? Are we using a centralized gateway? Like, there's all this talk about rogue and shadow APIs and things like that. To me, that is a symptom of weak governance, right? If you don't know what all the APIs you have, and I know it's big companies, that's tricky, that's a governance issue. And I really like what you guys did at Kroger, which was to not just like bolt on some technology that will like sniff and watch and ferret out these APIs, but you guys went around and talked to the development organization and created a marketplace, right? So you solved a problem by actually delivering value to the organization. If you're creating an API at Kroger, here's a marketplace for you to showcase it, to make other people aware of it, to be able to leverage the APIs that you create, right? So governance is where it starts, right? Make sure your APIs are developed in a consistent way, that they're properly documented, that they're being deployed in a consistent way, that you have access, visibility, knowledge of all that. The next step is testing and then monitoring. So testing is really near and dear to our heart. That's what we do for a living. It's how do you make sure that your APIs are free of vulnerabilities before they ever go into production, right? And the sort of state of the art for a lot of folks is like pen test once or twice a year, red teams, manual testing, that sort of thing. That does not work with APIs. Why? How often are you pushing new code into production? Is it every week? Is it every day? Is it every hour, right? And how often do you do your pen tests, right? Once or twice a year? Is it even touching your APIs? So the testing has got to change. It has to be automated. It has to be continuous. It has to be comprehensive, right? And that's all pretty daunting. Talk to me about how to achieve that, but that's what you need to do, right? If you're really going to pressure test your APIs on every release, you're not going to do it by hand, right? It has to be done proactively and with automation. And the third is monitoring, right? So once your APIs are in production, right, how are you going to find out if there are 260 million email requests happening, right? You've got to be monitoring for that, doing anomaly detection, that sort of thing. Your WAFs are probably not API savvy yet, or they're getting there. So you've got to really have API-aware monitoring technologies in line to watch and detect these types of threats as they're happening. Okay, and we can skip that because we pretty much already talked about it. This is a recent Gartner report called the Hype Cycle for Application Security. Just came out, and some of the things that I found interesting in this report were, okay, they recognize apps are being developed faster, more agile. Developers are being relied upon to secure code, right? So we've had this like total siloed approach in many organizations between development and security, right? And not a lot of communication happening, or not enough communication. But when we're talking about APIs and the types of threats that are happening, the fix is almost always in code, right? Yes, you can put a WAF to block high volume things, but all those logic flaws, authorization flaws, that sort of thing, the fixes are in code, right? And so, yeah, developers are being relied upon to secure the code more and more. And existing AppSec controls aren't cutting it, right? So static analyzers, dynamic, DAS tools, web app firewalls, they're not blocking Coinbases of the world, right? They didn't even block, Duolingo, right? You guarantee you they all are using those technologies, right? So there's a gap in what's in the tools that we've got. And I found these quotes interesting right from the Gartner report, right? API attacks will result in a stream of data breaches. Yeah, we know that, right? Like, that's pretty evident. DevSecOps teams are increasingly interested in API testing and security. Not only just the security team, but the dev team interested in this as well. Traditional application security tools were not designed to meet the requirements of APIs. It's a different challenge, right? And it takes a different approach to address it. All right, so I want to pivot now to some compliance topics, right? Specifically around PCI, because I think that touches a lot of folks, and it's actually quite interesting at this moment in time. So this year, or last year, they released the newest version of PCI. It's PCI DSS 4.0. 4.0 is now like law of the land, and by March of next year, right, so that's 6-7 months from now, if you're subject to PCI, you have to comply with this new requirement, 4.0. If you look at the old version, 3.2.1, which was, I don't know, 6-7 years old, and if all you did was just do a Control F and look for the word API, I know this is really going to be too small for folks on the screen, but zero, no mention of API in the last version of DSS. If you look at 4.0, at least 8 mentions of API, and actually it goes way beyond that. All right, so they're recognizing that APIs are very much in scope now for security. And when I say it goes way beyond that, one of the concepts in PCI is custom and bespoke software, right? There's all these requirements, right? Under 6.0, secure software applications, 6.2.1, secure software development, 6.2.2, secure developer training, code reviews, prevent common vulnerabilities, vulnerability management, software inventory, all of these things, right? A lot of them mention APIs by name. All of them mention custom and bespoke software, right? And sort of by definition, that umbrella includes your APIs. And your auditors are going to be all over this as well, right? They know that this is a major breach vehicle. You want to be able to demonstrate to your auditors that you're actually taking the right steps to address your APIs. And we've actually created this kind of questionnaire. If you want it, you can email me or contact me. But all we did was we just went through the entire DSS document and extracted what's relevant for APIs, and then turn it into a questionnaire. So just questions you should be asking yourself, asking your colleagues, asking your teammates, right? But it's now it's real, right? The DSS is live. You got to comply by March, and so if PCI is relevant to you, then this is relevant to you. So as we sort of wind things up here, so these are some of the yeah, go ahead. And yeah, the SBOM, and remind us the notification details. Yeah. Yeah. Robert's comment was about was it SEC and the disclosure requirements around SBOM and third-party risks and breaches. 4 days you got to notify publicly, to be aware of it and to notify. All right, so hit a few best practices here. As I mentioned, starting with governance is always a really good place, right? It's very easy to just sort of bolt on, like, oh, we're gonna whack this mole, we're gonna whack that mole, but really, you want to sort of just take a holistic approach to security in general, including API security, right? So what are your policies? What are your standards? What are your requirements? Centralizing API management, so we don't have APIs randomly, being deployed in all kinds of different ways. Making sure every API goes live in a standard gated way, like everything gets tested, everything gets vetted, everything goes through the right checks and balances. I love this number 2, embedding security champions into the dev org. We've talked to tons of CISOs, and the ones that seem to do it best, they actually take members of their team and drop them into development organizations, dotted lines, all these kinds of things, but help create that culture, right? Be a resource for the organization to help elevate the security. Provide the training, of course. That's what we're all about here at API University. But make sure that training's covering APIs, right? Like, I know a lot of people were pretty shocked by some of the conversations, some of the examples that we gave. That's what your developers need to be aware of, right? And to be thinking about as they're writing this code, not just what's the way it's meant to be implemented, but also what are the ways that it could be abused? How could it be exploited? Create comprehensive testing, we talked about it, right? Like make sure every endpoint is getting tested, every parameter, all the payloads. You're throwing, every kind of injection and manipulation of that API. Do it in a continuous, automated way. I'll skip the do's and don'ts. That's all in the courses. But this is what API University is all about, right? As I said, it's all it's a free resource. The courses we got today, API penetration testing. This is kind of our flagship course. It's very hands-on. It's very meaty. I don't know if any of you guys have taken it. Have you? Yeah. What do you think of it? It's a hard one? No, it's a very good one, yeah. This is about 12 hours of video content. You will learn from the expert. My friend who wrote this book, Hacking APIs, Corey Ball, absolute master of this. It's a fantastic course. All free. Then we created the API Security Fundamentals. A lot of stuff that you've heard today is in there. It's about 90 minutes, and it really goes through all the stuff that you want your colleagues to know about, right? What's the OWASP? What are these breaches? What are the 3 pillars? All of these kinds of things. We have a whole course dedicated to the OWASP, and all of these have certifications, by the way. You see them down there. We recently made a course on PCI compliance, API security for PCI. So we break down all those sections. What do they mean? What should you be thinking about? And then this one's pretty cool. We made a course on API documentation best practices. And we actually featured, did you take that one too? No, but I want to add something to it. Oh. This is, I think you added it not too long ago. The thing is, yeah, this one's new, yeah. Documentation. Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's true, right? No documentation, bad documentation, inconsistent documentation. Those are all symptoms, right? So now this is a great course. It's actually taught by the CTO of Stoplight, which is, they're in the documentation business. Again, they don't push any products in these courses. They just impart their expertise. We actually have a certification, if you will. We call it CASA, Certified API Security Analyst. It's the first thing we've ever charged for. It's $150. It's a 100-question exam to really test how deep is your knowledge of API security. We've got all these nice badges. Every course you get a badge, right? And you see them on LinkedIn a whole lot. So that's what we're all about. And just as I wrap up, I just want to thank y'all for inviting me, for letting me be part of this. I mentioned this book here. This is, if you really want to learn about how to hack APIs and understand like the ways that you can breach them, that's what this book is. I don't know how many I can give away, but if you're interested, like take a picture of that, fill out your info, or just contact me, dan@apsecuniversity.com, and I'd be happy to send you a copy here. But thanks again so much. Happy to take questions if anyone has any. But thanks a lot for having me. Anyone got questions? Yeah, go. Yeah, what would be my top 3 recommendations for securing APIs? Well, the first one would be the big one, is to actually step back and do a proper, just very thoughtful, methodical approach, right? That's the long game, right? And I think that's what you guys were doing at Kroger, is saying, that's the governance angle, right? Let's make sure we're actually developing APIs in a consistent way. We have style guides defined, right? So everyone writes APIs in the same way. They're all documented. All of that is being captured in a central marketplace. They're being deployed in a central gateway or something like that. For sure, that's going to give you the best long-term results, right? The tactical things are there's some real basics, right? Go and inventory your endpoints and make sure, some endpoints are meant to be open, unsecured, right? If you're creating a new account, right? Like, okay, you don't have an authentication, that should be open. But like, go and look at all of your APIs, all those endpoints, and really understand, like, do we have the proper authentication on it? And then go the next step and say, do we have the proper controls? Right? Authentication is something you can enforce at a gateway, but you can't really enforce authentication at the gateway. That's got to be written into the application itself, right? So when Coinbase had a missing logic validation check, that's an authorization issue. You've got to be writing that into the code. And maybe that brings to the third, which is just education, right? Like make sure, I mean, developers are busy, they're pumping out features and fixes and all that kind of stuff. Help elevate their awareness of the issues, right? And obviously, our courses are good for that, but, it's a lot easier. I remember my first job was at General Motors. I was a mechanical engineer, and they used to beat into us how if you find a flaw during design, it costs $10. If you find a flaw during testing, it costs $100. If you find it in production, it's $10,000, right? And so elevate the awareness of the dev team to the risks and the issues here, and then you'll end up with a lot fewer issues to deal with. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, sure, sure. I'll try to run around it. Your point was, know your weaknesses. What are the sensitive like pressure points that exist in your APIs that could be exploited, right? And refresh. I know you lost the train of thought. What were you saying? Oh, shadow IP. Yeah, shadow. Yeah. So this is a good one, right? Personally, right? This goes back to governance. Like if you have shadow, rogue, zombie APIs, that's a governance issue. Okay, fine. So one way to do that is to go inventory, survey, talk to the development organizations. I talked to a lot of security teams. They say we have no idea what APIs we have, right? And I said that means you don't know what APIs you have. It's not that the company doesn't know what APIs are. So, all right, I'm a big believer in go talk to that side of the organization, right? Now, you're probably still not going to find them all, right? So there's everything from just go walk down the hall and talk to people and, have a like sort of the brute force way, if you want to call it that, right? Hopefully leads to a more like programmatic outcome where like these things actually get inventoried and right when they're being dreamt up, when they're being sort of sketched out, right? That's becoming part of this process, all the way to the other end, which is all right. Let's just stick sensors all over the network to detect these things, right? And there are tools, the technologies that do that, right? You probably need a layered approach if you're really going to get there, right? But the sensor approach is kind of like I don't love it because it's one more thing to stick in. You've got to instrument everything. If that API is not being exercised, it's not being discovered, right? If there are endpoints that aren't being used, those aren't being discovered. So I like the Kroger approach a lot better, which is like, let's just build a culture of knowing what there is, having them all in a central repository, giving benefits to developers from having their APIs centrally discoverable, right, and reusable and all of that kind of thing. So to me, that's That's a much healthier approach than let's just put cameras all over the place to try to find them whenever they might pop up. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Part of even it's in DSS and the PCI regs, and it's part of OWASP, the improper inventory. Like, you got to know what APIs you use, right? That's part of having an inventory, right? And there are all kinds of like crazy attack vectors, right? We talked about like Experian, where an API they published got misused, right? But think about, like, let's say you have an API that you use from a third party to do address normalization, all right? Someone puts in their address, it's all gobbledygook, right? You want to have like a nice clean, zip with +4, and the street is all normalized, right? And so you use somebody else's API to clean up that data. They're in that space. Then I'm a hacker. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go, try to hack that database, and I'm going to change my address from 555 main suite whatever to 555 main suite drop table, right? Or some injection or something like that, right? Drop table is silly, but because I'm not that technical, I can't give you a good example, right? But now I go to your site and I make an order, right? And I use my address, and I know you're going to call that thing, right? Probably pro tip 0 is you do not trust anything, right? Input validation, even from your trusted partners that you're using. So you have to sanitize and verify. Like, imagine you have a profile feature on your API, right? And provide your LinkedIn URL, right? It's pretty common, right? So they stick in not a LinkedIn URL, they put /Etsy/password, users or whatever, right? If you aren't validating that the thing that is being submitted looks like what you're expecting, then you have to toss it, right? And so whether that's your own APIs or the third-party APIs, right? So it's really critical to be inventorying your third-party APIs pretty regularly and putting them through their own security checks, make sure they're up to snuff, testing their APIs as well. So that's a really critical part. Right. Right. Yeah. So, well, right. So the question is, like, if you've got third-party code that you're not even writing, you're not touching, it's just part of your stack, it's just now accessible, and your point's right. Like, it's part, and so yeah, you can't ask your developers to fix that, right? So probably maybe more on the security team. So like, okay, what are we using, and are we vetting those third parties properly? Like, how are they satisfying our need to be confident in the safety of their APIs? Yeah. Move it. Yeah. 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 No. So the comment is about isolation, right, and being able to kind of contain breaches, contain damage, which is a great point. Do you have a question? Were you making a comment? No. I thought I saw your hand come up. Anyone else? Yeah. 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 That's it's a really great point. And the question or the comment is about internal APIs that somehow become external in ways that are never intended, never foreseen. I did a webinar a few months ago with this guy Sam Curry. Really incredible. If you want to hear about internal APIs not actually being internal, so he basically hacked every car that you can imagine, like probably almost everybody's car here in the room, right? Successfully through APIs. right? I should put some more of those examples in there. What he did, what started with was he was visiting some friends at college, and he saw all those scooters. And he's like, oh, that's interesting. Look at all those scooters. I wonder if I can hack them, right? And so he installed the app, and then he started sniffing the traffic. He's like, oh, all right, let me see if I can make them, flash their lights and honk their horns. And within like a minute, he had the entire campus flashing lights and honking horns, right? And he's got videos of this. It's all on his YouTube channel. And then he's like, huh, that was easy. I wonder if I could hack cars, right? And so everything, Ford, Mercedes, VW, you name everything, right? The one that he said he couldn't do was Subaru, believe it or not. Probably, I don't know. All I know is like my car is super connected. I can turn on the AC. I can do all these things, right? All APIs, right? And you think about like, are these like really like software companies? They need to be, right? There's tons of software going on here. And so to your point about internal versus external, like there's this belief that if our APIs are internal, we don't need to worry about them as much. And maybe that's partially true. Like maybe, all right, if your APIs are like right out there in the world, yeah, you probably need to worry about them more. But what he found was like, he found websites, just Googling around, sniffing around, he would find like SSO sign-on, single sign-on portals for employees at Mercedes-Benz or something like that, right? And then he would create an account. Like a lot of these things had like create an account, right? that would give you no privileges or anything. It's just like you got an account, right? So he did that. And then he looked at it and he was watching the traffic and he's like, I wonder if there's a parameter called dealer, right? So he put, user type equal dealer in the API call and it worked, right? And suddenly he's accessing dealer databases. He did this for Ferrari. You can even reassign the ownership of vehicles, right? From one user to another, right? Can you imagine you buy a Ferrari and now you don't own it, right? So these were clearly never intended to be public, and he still found them, right? So there's definitely a belief that my internal APIs are safer. I don't need to worry about them as much. But you watch this webinar. He's got an incredible blog that goes into all the gory details, and yeah, a lot of your internal APIs are not as internal as you might think. Yeah. Yeah, treat everything as public. That's right. It's the zero trust approach. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll send the link out as well. Yeah, it's really fascinating. The car companies don't like them that much. Let me tell you that. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, and things happen. Like we do a lot of testing. On your point about like you might put WAFs and things like that, but the laptop gets outside the network, and suddenly the WAF's not protecting it. And also things change. Like a lot of what we do with this automated testing is we'll test like, is your WAF blocking what it's meant to be blocking? And sometimes it's not. And we'll ask them like, why are our tests working? That should be not getting through. Yeah. Well, yeah, there you go, right? So there are all kinds of workarounds, but in this particular case, the security team, they were baffled. Why aren't these high volume attacks getting blocked? And it turned out somebody had turned the WAF into learning mode, right? And hadn't told anybody. And maybe they did it to solve a support issue for a day and never went back and fixed it, right? Like these things happen, right? So yeah, monitoring is super important, right? But it's not everything. Yeah. Oh yeah. And to your point, the business denial of service, that's actually on the OWASP. That's actually on the OWASP top 10 if I go back far enough. They have something called unrestricted access to sensitive business flows, something like that. And the classic example is the Ticketmaster example, right? Like, can your API be used to scoop up all the inventory of whatever product you're selling, right? That's an abuse of your sensitive business flow, right? That's what they're trying to say. It's a convoluted language, but it's basically your unique business logic, right? And making sure that you've got protections to make sure that that abuse can't happen. And so it's a really good point, right? That's a critical thing, and those are your personal 0 days, right? There's no common vulnerability for your sensitive business flow, right? And you've got to be thinking about how your business can be impacted by abuse. And let's face it, like the beauty of APIs is they're machine interfaces. They're super fast. You can do millions of transactions in a second, right? If your sensitive business flow can be abused at a rate of millions of transactions in a second, that's like, incredibly damaging to your business, to your reputation, and so forth. How are we on time? We're good? Any more questions? Yeah. Yeah. The question is an API gateway like enough security when there are routes around it? Do you want to put the security closer to the source? Like I'm not an expert on all of this stuff. I personally like the concept of an API gateway, and what's becoming quite clear is there's no real holy grail of we have one master API gateway and everything's going to run through it. It seems like where organizations are landing is multiple gateways, multiple branded different providers of gateways, and we're having this discussion, and this is talking about, again, authentication, right? And gateways to authentication. One of your top two was object level authorization. Yeah. As a developer and somebody who actually spends a lot of time looking at this, and this might be a Robert topic, as a follow-up, right? I don't feel like there's actually a lot of products that are really viable for me to just go out and try to get help doing object level authorization. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I'll try to. The question is like authentication can be tackled at the gateway. You're right. Authorization, not so much, right? And it's tricky, right? In terms of products, I wasn't even aware of one until you mentioned it. To me, it just seems like that's part of your application logic, right? And it's not really like, here, let's bolt on this extra tool or product, and it'll tackle authorization. But maybe there's some new techniques for that. You can, yeah.
Robert, when you were still here, we were going back and forth about I got to stand in the thing. They don't have to see me; they just have to hear me. We were debating authorization as a domain, but not everyone does authorization the same. So, like, do you distribute that and you let the people closest to understanding that domain determine authorization, or do you build some kind of super authorization model that does it all, kind of thing? I don't like the one thing that does it all. Those never work. So distributing authorization, though, makes that extremely complicated, too. So I'm interested in that talk next time, and we got something lined up already. That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, So, Robert Buchanan, I'm talking in October. I can cover authorization of show of hands once that topic next time. Seems pretty unanimous. But, you know, some of the acronym soup out there, there's ABAC, RBAC, PBAC, you know, REBAC, and basically any access control list or ACL list, you know, gets into that space. And, you know, to John's point, we coined a term at Kroger when I was there is finely coarse-grained, because the gateways had to handle coarse-grained OWASP scopes or OIDC scopes, but you still had to get fine enough grain that it isolated the functionality. And then you still got into app level authorizations to say, you know, can John view Robert's data? Is there a hierarchy? What's the least, you know, permission available? And there's a lot of scenarios. So I can cover that in October if you guys are interested.
Right on. Thank you. Anyone else? Any more questions? Yes, go. Good question. I think I would cover that under governance, believe it or not. Oh, to repeat the question, yes. Why is education not a pillar? Maybe it should be. Maybe I should have 4 pillars. Yeah, no, that gets fair feedback. It probably deserves its own thing, right? And I wonder where you could find some good education on API security. Yeah, maybe it was too promotional. Yeah. No, but it's critical, right? It's part of the like, if you want the long-term good outcome, right? Along with governance, you got it. And it's actually, I like PCI because it's very prescriptive. It's not like one of these HIPAA things. It's like, thou shalt be safe, right? You know, like PCI is like, you got to do all these things. And one of the things that they say is developer training, annual developer. And they even go on to say, including tools for discovering vulnerabilities, right? And they recognize that that's actually now not just like a security job. That's a developer engineering job as well. So, yeah, maybe we need to add a 4th pillar to it. I like 3s, but you know, that one actually, I think that one is worth it. Anyone else? All right, I think we're all good. Thanks so much, everyone.
All right, so that concludes our first ever API Security Meetup for Columbus, Dayton, Cincinnati. Thank you. You guys were our first. We've got Robert Buchanan October 10th coming up next, so hope. Yep. So Robert works at P&G, and he's working on using that as the next location. If that falls through, we might be back here. All right. So thanks again, everyone. Appreciate it.